Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot is a play in which, famously, nothing happens twice. Yet, paradoxically, almost everything that matters to human existence is contained in that nothing: waiting, anxiety, habit, memory, faith, power, language, and the body itself. Today, instead of moving through the play scene by scene or theme by theme, this lecture will move character by character because in Waiting for Godot, the characters are not just people on the stage, they are structures of feeling. Each one is like a cross section of modern consciousness. We will look at Vladimir, Estragon, their relationship as a pair, Pozo and Lucky's dynamic, the boy, and the absent figure of Godot. As we move, we will see how Beckett's themes of absurdism, modern anxiety, the breakdown of language, and also the key symbols like the boots, hats, the tree, and the rope are all embodied within these figures. Let's begin with the character who, in some ways, is the mind of the play, Vladimir. So, Vladimir, often called Didi, is one of the two tramps waiting by the bare tree. Beckett himself called him the major character, and most critics agree that he is the more intellectual, more reflective, and more spiritually anxious of the pair of Vladimir and Estragon. From the beginning, Vladimir is associated with the head, with thought, and with memory. He wears the hat. He is often fiddling with it. He is the one who remembers yesterday and the one who tries to make sense of events. Early in Act 1, when Estragon struggles with his boot, Vladimir slips into a religious philosophical reflection on the two thieves crucified with Christ. Vladimir says two thieves crucified at the same time as our Savior. One, one is supposed to have been saved and the other damned. With these lines, we see that he is questioning why only one of the four evangelists tells this version. Vladimir's concern is not just theology but certainty. If even scriptures give conflicting accounts, what can we rely on? His mind keeps circling around this, reflecting the modern intellectual's crisis of faith and truth. Vladimir, then, is the figure of consciousness that cannot stop asking the questions of how and why, even when no answer is forthcoming. Vladimir also holds on to hope, often more than Estragon. At the end of Act 1, he clings to the boy's message that Godot will surely come tomorrow. In this dialogue, Vladimir says, "Ah, Gogo, don't go on like that. Tomorrow everything will be better." Estragon says, "How do you make that out?" So Vladimir replies, "Did you not hear what the child said? He said that Godot was sure to come tomorrow." Now, this is irrational hope. Everything around them contradicts it. But Vladimir's mind cannot accept a world without some promise, some meaning. So he chooses belief. He stands for the modern person who keeps telling themselves, tomorrow everything will be better, even when experience is suggesting otherwise. However, at the same time, Vladimir is also painfully aware of boredom and nothingness. At one point, he cries, "We are bored to death. There's no denying it. We are in no danger of losing our lives, but we might die of the boredom." This tension between his craving for meaning and his awareness of meaninglessness, this is what makes Vladimir a deeply modern, deeply anxious figure. He knows the absurdity, but he cannot live without some illusion of purpose. Vladimir is also the one who feels a kind of responsibility, a fragile moral conscience. When Estragon is hurt, Vladimir comforts him. Estragon says, "I'll never walk again." Vladimir replies, "I'll carry you, if necessary." Here we see that Vladimir is gentle, almost parental. He feeds Astragon, reminds him of Godot, tries to keep him from leaving. He often believes Estragon would not survive without him. Yet, notice that if necessary, which Vladimir says, even his tenderness is hedged, conditional. He wants to be caring, but he also resents the burden. This ambivalence mirrors modern relationships, which are a mixture of love, dependency, frustration, and fatigue. It is also interesting to note that Vladimir is also the one who speaks more than any other character in the play. He philosophizes, he plays with words, he gets caught in circular arguments. At one point in the play, he bursts out saying, "Let us not waste our time in idle discourse. Let us do something while we have the chance." But what do you see happens after that? What does he do after this passionate plea? He goes back to talking. He cannot break out of language into action. Through Vladimir, Beckett is showing us a specifically modern problem, which is the overproduction of talk and thought with very little actual change. It is the intellectual trapped in his own speech who is aware, articulate, but at the same time impotent, not able to do anything. If Vladimir is associated with the head and memory, estragon, also referred to as gogo, is associated with the body and the immediate moment. The very first actions of the play concern Estragon struggling with his boot. Estragon, sitting on a low mount, is trying to take off his boot. He pulls at it with both hands. He gives up, exhausted. Nothing to be done. This particular line, "nothing to be done," becomes a refrain of the whole play. Through Estragon's boot, Beckett ties him to pain, effort, the material world, so to say. Where Vladimir's symbol is the hat, for thought, Estragon's is the boot, for the body, for trudging through life. Estragon is constantly hungry, first of all. He is asking for carrots, turnips, radishes. He is also sleepy. He wants to lie down to dream. And finally, he is also beaten, returning having attacked by them during the night. We don't know who them is, and he does not specify. When Vladimir asks him, "And they didn't beat you?" Estragon replies, "Certainly they beat me." Then, when Vladimir asks, "The same lot as usual?" Estragon answers, "The same, I don't know." This shows two things at once: the banality of violence, being beaten is routine for Estragon, and secondly, the blur of memory. They are faceless. The same or different no longer matters. It is a portrait of everyday suffering of the anonymous modern man. Estragon as a character also repeatedly forgets. He forgets what happened yesterday. He forgets Godot's name. He even forgets why they are waiting. In one sense, this can be played for comic effect. In another, it is deeply unsettling. It evokes trauma, fatigue, and the fragmentation of the modern memory. If Vladimir clings to memory and history, Estragon sinks to the present, the pain of his feet, the desire to sleep, the fear of being beaten again tonight. He often simply wants to leave. He says, "Let's go." Estragon's recurring line, "nothing to be done," is not a philosophical statement for him. It is like a physical experience. His body tells him, "I am exhausted, I cannot." He embodies the modern subject overwhelmed by sheer survival. If we are to look at Estragon's language, we see that his speech is shorter, more concrete, and more comic. He provides much of the play's clown like humor. Yet, in his humor, there is always this edge of despair that we can find. He jokes about hanging themselves, almost way too casually. The line between joke and genuine suicidal impulse is thin. One of his most striking lines about humanity is, "People are bloody ignorant apes." This is the opposite pole to Vladimir's moral conscience. Estragon's voice is a blunt misanthropy, a loss of faith in people. His language is simple, but it carries the bitterness of one who has been beaten too often. Through Estragon, Beckett gives us the wounded, skeptical, physically exhausted modern person who has lost trust in memory, society, and even in himself. Now, if Vladimir and Estragon can be seen separately as head and body, together they form something like a split self, one human being divided into two figures. Beckett draws on the tradition of comic double acts, Laurel and Hardy, for example, but gives it an existential depth. Their relationship is one of deep interdependence mixed with profound irritation. They threaten to part, but they never actually do. They seem unable to live either together or apart. There is tenderness. When we see the lines, I'll carry you if necessary, we find the tenderness. There is also exasperation. When Vladimir cries, you are a hard man to get on with, Gogo. They constantly try to play games to pass the time, exchanging hats, pretending to be Pozo and Lucky, insulting each other. This silliness is not trivial, it is how they survive waiting. They create little rituals to starve off despair. They use each other as entertainment, as distraction, which is both touching and cruel. Their friendship is one of the most accurate portraits of many modern relationships. It is a mix of love, dependency, performativity, and boredom. One of the most famous exchanges in the play is this dialogue between Vladimir and Estragon. Estragon says, let's go. Vladimir says, we can't. Estragon says, why not? And Vladimir replies, we are waiting for Godot. This small dialogue encapsulates the entire structure of their lives. They cannot act because they are waiting. Waiting becomes an excuse for inaction. They even discuss suicide, but they postpone that as well, saying we'll hang ourselves tomorrow, and that tomorrow never comes. Towards the end of the play, they decide to leave. Vladimir says, well, shall we go? Estragon replies, yes, let's go. And then in the stage directions, we have this line, they do not move. The words of decision are there, but the action is not. This gap between language and action is at the heart of the theater of the absurd. For Vladimir and Estragon, speech does not lead to change, it only circles back on itself. They embody the modern subject paralyzed by expectation, waiting for a job, a revolution, a lover, a letter, a sign from God, anything. They keep deferring real decisions because something or someone is supposed to arrive first. Their dialogues are full of repetition, misunderstanding, and verbal loops. Questions go unanswered, memories are contested, they contradict themselves. This often creates humor, but it also dramatizes the breakdown of meaningful communication in modern life. Their exchanges can be read as, firstly, a critique of cliched, empty conversations, secondly, a dramatization of how language can fail to connect us, thirdly, a picture of how people talk in order not to confront silence, death, or despair. So basically, they are running away from these serious topics that are bothering them. In this sense, Vladimir and Estragon together are modern man, split into two, thinking and feeling, hoping and doubting, talking and then doing nothing. Moving on to Pozo, the loud, imperious landowner with a whip, the pipe, and the slave. When he first appears, Estragon even mistakes him for Godot, which is significant. He looks like a man of power, perhaps even like God. There's this line by Pozo that reads, you are human beings nonetheless, as far as one can see, of the same species as myself, of the same species as Pozo, made in God's image. Here, he both inflates himself and degrades others. Being of the same species as Pozo is, to Pozo, a compliment. The line mocks the biblical claim that humanity is made in God's image. If someone like Pozo is godlike, what does that say about God or about power? Pozo, as a character, represents capitalist landowning authority. He also is like the authoritarian voice that defines others or classifies others as human beings or as trash. He is also a grotesque parody of a godlike figure, or god figure, you can say, who is commanding, cruel, and self obsessed. At first glance, Pozo seems entirely in control. He jerks Lucky's rope, orders him to dance, to think, to carry luggage. But even in Act 1, we see the cracks. He is forgetful, he loses his watch, he panics when he misplaces things. His power depends on small props, which are the rope, the whip, and the watch. And by Act 2, Pozo returns blind, stumbling, helpless, now dependent on Lucky to guide him. The roles have shifted in a way, though the structure is still cruel. With this, Beckett shows that earthly power is unstable. Pozo, who is a proud master in Act 1, is reduced to shouting and a frightened body by the Act 2. His blindness can be seen as, firstly, a symbol of the blindness of those in power. Secondly, the inevitable decay of all human authority. And thirdly, his blindness can also be seen as a reminder that time will strip away all pretensions. Pozo tells Vladimir and Estragon when they ask when he became blind. He says, I woke up one fine day and I was blind, as I had awoken one fine day and I was sighted. Time for Pozo is senseless. Suffering and loss come without reason or justice. Another aspect that represents the modern absurdity. When we consider Pozo's language, we see that he speaks in elaborate theatrical rhetoric. He performs his own grandeur, yet his speeches are self absorbed and hollow. When he explains Lucky's state, he tells more about himself. He cries about how much Lucky has hurt him emotionally, even as he physically abuses Lucky. In Pozo's language, we can see the way power justifies itself. We can also see the narcissism of the authoritarian personality. And finally, we see how language is used not to communicate the truth but to reinforce hierarchy. In this way, Pozo embodies the modern master, ostensibly in charge but actually terrified, dependent, and doomed to decay. Now let us consider Lucky, who is, in a way, the strangest figure in the play. For a long time, he appears almost mute, obeying Pozo mechanically, staggering under immense baggage, and choking on his rope. Visually, Lucky is a picture of servitude. He is a man literally tethered by a rope, carrying things that are not his, dehumanized into a beast of burden. Also, his name, Lucky, it is in a way sharply ironic because he appears to be anything but lucky. This dark humor is characteristic of the play's mixture of comedy and cruelty. Vladimir and Estragon initially respond with sympathy, but they soon begin to use him as a kind of entertainment, making him dance and think on command. This reflects how even the oppressed can be turned into skeptical for others. Lucky's one major speech is his monologue in Act 1, when Pozo commands him to think. What follows is basically what can be described as a flood of words. And when we try to analyze his speech, we see that it is grammatically tangled and is almost without punctuation whatsoever. He is mixing philosophical, theological, and the scientific jargon, and he is also repeating phrases like I resume, for reasons unknown, in the interest of, which is a thing. And at the end of the day, we can understand that there is no real meaning to his speech whatsoever. Critics often see it as a parody of academic discourse, also of theological treatises about God, and scientific or philosophical jargon that has lost contact with life. Lucky's thought collapses into meaningless sound, yet it is packed with the very vocabulary that is supposed to give meaning: God, man, nature, reason, etc. These are the words that Lucky uses, which in a way are supposed to give life meaning, yet here they are collapsing into meaninglessness. Beckett shows how the highest languages of modernity can become pure noises, especially when divorced from actual human concern. Now, when we look at the dynamic between Lucky and Pozo, it is a form of a master slave or capital labor structure. Pozo claims Lucky taught him all his beautiful things, his knowledge, his culture, and yet Lucky is now treated as waste. There is a strange symbiosis. Pozo cannot move without Lucky, and Lucky cannot stop serving Pozo. In Act 2, when Pozo is blind, Lucky continues to pull him. Both are diminished, but the rope remains. This can also be read as a critique of economic exploitation and a reflection on how systems of domination deform both the one who is in power and the one who is serving. Their relationship can also be read as a symbol of how entrenched power relations survive even when both parties are suffering. Lucky's near silence, punctuated by one monstrous outburst of language, suggests that modern people often oscillate between mute suffering and overwhelming incoherent speech. Beckett has given us two pairs in this play: Vladimir and Estragon, and Lucky and Bozo. They are like two mirrors reflecting different aspects of modern humanity. Both pairs exhibit interdependence because each member cannot function alone, power imbalance because one is more dominant and the other one is more passive. And thirdly, they exhibit the failure to separate because despite conflict, they remain tied to one another. Where Vladimir and Estragon's bond is based on friendship, habit, and mutual need, Pozo and Lucky's is based on explicit domination and oppression. This difference foregrounds the question: are our relationships freely chosen, or are they bound by ropes we do not fully see yet? In a sense, Vladimir and Estragon can be seen as spiritual or existential man, waiting, thinking, and doubting, whereas Lucky and Pozo can be seen as the economic or the social man, concerned with power, class, and exploitation. Together, they show that modern anxiety is not just internal but also structural. It arises from social hierarchies, labor systems, and the dehumanization of others alongside the self. Lucky and Pozo parody the master and slave dialectic. Vladimir and Estragon parody the friends, thinkers, or believers who are stuck but cannot leave. Between the two, Beckett covers both inner and outer conditions of modern life. Another character is of the boy, who appears briefly in both acts as a messenger from Godot. He is shy, nervous, and inconsistent in his memory. In Act 1, he says he has not seen Vladimir and Estragon before. In Act 2, he again says he has not seen them, even though he clearly has. The boy, he brings the message that Godot will not come today but surely tomorrow. The boy also claims Godot beats his brother but he is kind to him. And this boy works in Godot's garden, tending goats or sheep depending on which account you read. He is like a fragile pipeline through which hope and news arrive, always too little, too late, and too vague. Now, Godot is himself an absent character. Godot never appears. The entire play is oriented around his non arrival. Different readings see Godot as a symbol of God, or a symbol of meaning, salvation, or a decisive event, and it is also seen as a symbol of bureaucracy, authority, the big break in life, the revolution, or the cure. Beckett resisted simple allegorization, but the very absence of Godot is crucial. Modern man waits for something transcendent or transformative that never actually arrives. The boy's hesitant, unreliable messages reinforce the uncertainty of revelation. We never get a clear word from the one we are waiting for. This is deeply connected to the post war disillusionment and the collapse of grand narratives. Although the play has a famously bare stage, the few objects Beckett gives us are rich in symbolic resonance, and each is connected to the characters. First one being the tree. The single tree on stage is, at first, almost bare. In Act 2, it has sprouted a few leaves, despite only one night having passed. Time here is not realistic, it is absurd. For Vladimir and Istragon, the tree is, firstly, a gallows. They consider hanging themselves from it. Secondly, it is a possible sign of life. The leaves appearing is suggesting change. And thirdly, it could also mean a stubborn presence in a world of emptiness. The tree mirrors their inner state, minimal growth, minimal hope, but still a sign that something is happening, even if they cannot interpret it. Secondly, the boots and hats, which is representing the body and mind respectively. As mentioned before, Estragon's boots symbolize the body, pain, contact with the earth, the difficulty of moving forward. Vladimir's and Lucky's hat symbolize the head, thought, and identity. There is a famous hat swapping routine where Vladimir, Estragon, and Lucky exchange hats rapidly. This can be seen as a parody of rational thought, putting on different hats when no real decision is reached. It is also like a picture of identity as something superficial and interchangeable. And finally, it can be seen as a moment where language and gesture become pure mechanical repetition, emptied of content. Through boots and hats, Beckett literalizes the split between thinking and walking, and between philosophy and survival. The rope is another important symbol, and it appears firstly as Lucky's tether to Pozo, and secondly as the belt Vladimir and Estragon consider using to hang themselves. It is thus a symbol of self destruction. The same object that ties Lucky to his master could be used by Vladimir and Estragon to end their own waiting. But even here they fail. The rope breaks, or they hesitate. This double use of rope shows how the tools of oppression can become the tools of escape, and yet neither function fully. Modern subjects are caught in structures they cannot quite break and cannot quite end. In Waiting for Godot, language itself is a symbol, perhaps the most important symbol. Each character's speech style embodies a different aspect of modern linguistic crisis. With Vladimir, his speech is reflective, philosophical, but ultimately ineffective. In case of Estragon, it is simple, bodily centered, and often forgetful. With Pozo, his speech is rhetorical, self dramatizing, and power saturated. With Lucky, his speech is academic, theological, scientific, but collapsing into nonsense and meaninglessness. Finally, with the boy, we have the hesitant, fragmented, and unreliable speech. The failure of language to bring clarity, or to guarantee memory, or even to produce action is at the heart of the play's absurdist spirit. Beckett is dramatizing this particular aspect that in the modern world We often live in a flood of words with political speeches, academic discourses, religious sermons, and even everyday chatter. But the genuine understanding and change is still out of our reach. Finally, if we step back and look at all these characters together, what kind of a world do they show us? They show us firstly a world of waiting. Vladimir and Estragon wait. Pozo and Lucky travel in circles. The boy delivers the same message twice. Life is suspended, always before some promised event that never comes. Secondly, it is a world of instability. Pozo loses his sight, Lucky seems to lose his speech, memories shift, time also behaves strangely, nothing is secure, whether it is health, power, identity, even the basic continuity of yesterday and today is disrupted. Thirdly, a world of fractured relationships is portrayed to us. Two pairs depend on each other and yet torture each other. Their bonds are necessary but painful. This reflects the ambivalence of human connection in the modern era. We also have a world where language is suspect. From Lucky's monologue to Pozo's speeches, from the tramps' banter to the boy's stammer, language does not deliver truth. It often screens it off. So we see a world where there is a breakdown of communication and language. Finally, we have a world that is beyond clear meaning. The play refuses to tell us who Godot really is or what characters really represent. This refusal is part of its power. It places us in a position as characters, trying to interpret the signs in a silent universe. Therefore, the characters in Waiting for Godot are not psychological portraits in the traditional realist sense. Rather, they are figures of modern anxiety. Vladimir is the mind that cannot stop thinking, remembering, and hoping. Estragon is representative of the body that suffers, forgets, and wants to sleep. Pozo represents the ego of power, strutting and then collapsing. Lucky is the servant mind, overloaded with knowledge and yet voiceless. The boy represents the fragile bearer of uncertain messages, and Godot is the absent character, the thing that we wait for but that never really comes. Through these characters, Beckett crafts a play where the character is the theme. To understand these people is to understand the world they inhabit. When one hears Waiting for Godot is about nothing, it may sound dismissive, but after walking through its characters, we can see that this nothing is actually a dense, painful, and often comic picture of modern existence. The characters show us how it feels to live after the collapse of traditional certainties, to wait for meaning in a universe that offers none, to be bound to others in relationships that are both sustaining and suffocating, and to speak endlessly and yet struggle to say anything that truly changes our lives. In their waiting, in their failures, in their talk, Vladimir, Estragon, Pozo, Lucky, the boy, and even the absent Godot, they stand as some of the most powerful representations of modern man and modern anxieties in 20th century drama.